Domnul ambasador David Saranga, ambasadorul Israelului în București, bine ați revenit la Pașaport Diplomatic și mulțumim că ne-ați primit în reședința dumneavoastră.
Bine ați venit, este o plăcere.
Let's start speaking about politics, and we'll use English for this one. The big news of last year was about normalization of relationship of Israel with some Arab countries, and I'm talking about the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. This type of normalization in the diplomatic world, at least, is not happening overnight. So the Trump administration couldn't be the only one working for this relations to go in a different direction. How was it?
It's a new paradigm. It's a new paradigm in the Middle East in which countries, Arab countries, decided that for their own good and for their own future, it's better to have relations with Israel. United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, all these countries understood that the only way for prosperity is by cooperation with Israel. And we all know how important the economy is, and we all know how important economic cooperation is. And today Israel, when Israel is a superpower, when it comes to the high-tech, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to R&D, therefore it was their own interest. At the same time, the fact that the Arab countries in the Middle East decided to have peace accords with Israel, it doesn't mean that we are neglecting other issues in the region. First, we have to remember that it's also their interest to be aligned with Israel when we are talking about Iran. Since Iran in the Middle East is trying to destabilize the region, since Iran is involved in every country where we see terror, if we're talking about Lebanon, if we're talking about Syria, if we're talking about Yemen, and so on and so forth. Today in the Middle East there are two forces. One force which wants peace. We're talking about Israel, we're talking about the moderate Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, we're talking about the United Arab Emirates and other countries in the Gulf. And on the other hand, we are having Iran and its allies, which is Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, and so on and so forth. So this is the context in which these accords took place.
Okay, as you said, some of them are in for business, some of them are in for, let's say, isolated themselves from Iran or isolate Iran. What is the Palestinian situation in this case?
We think that it's a great opportunity for the Palestinians to renew negotiations with Israel, especially in this area. We have to remember that the accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain are not on the expense of the Palestinians. On the contrary, if they join the train right now, if they join the peace process, it will be for their own good. At the same time, another important component, which is important, is that recently the Palestinians renewed their security cooperation with Israel, something that we perceive in a very positive way. And hopefully they will keep on this cooperation with Israel, because at the end it's our problem. It's the problem of Israel and the Palestinians to solve this problem, and the sooner the better.
Yeah, you're perfectly right. It's your problem. It's definitely between Israelis and Palestinians. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel, Gabi Ashkenazi, also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Jordan, who recently met your minister, kind of concluded that the Palestinians should go back to the negotiation table. But as you said in the beginning of our talk, it's a new paradigm. So what's in it for the Palestinians?
First, we have to remember that the Trump plan for peace is still out there. I don't know.
And I have to remember you that the Palestinians did not agree with that peace plan.
You're exactly talking about the problem. That we had a peace plan which the American administration invested a lot of time, efforts and money, and was rejected by the Palestinians. Again, at the end, it's the interest of the Palestinians to negotiate peace with Israel. By boycotting Israel, by refusing to negotiate, it will lead nowhere. Especially these days when we see winds of peace in the Middle East, this is the time for them to come. You know, in the past, the old paradigm said, if only we are going to solve the problem with the Palestinians, so the entire Arab world will come and sign agreements, peace agreements with Israel. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen because of many reasons. All of a sudden, we see it the other way around. The Arab world is coming to Israel, signing peace accords, and hopefully this way we will change also the paradigm of the Palestinians by coming back to the table of negotiations.
Is it the entire Arab world? Because we know that Saudi Arabia, of course, is very important in these relations, and we did saw a very secret meeting that everyone knew about it between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Prince Crown Mohammed bin Salman. What is this about? Because on the other hand, we have the position, official position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, saying that they are not so willing to, you know, sign a peace treatment with Israel because the two-state solution needs to be done first, or at least Palestinian to have a decent state where they can live and work.
It's much more complicated.
Of course,
it's more complicated, and we have to look at the things. You know, the Arab world is composed from different voices. And Saudi Arabia in the recent years is one of the more moderate voices in the Arab world when it comes to issues related to the peace process. Having said that,
but it's entirely Saudi Arabia, or is just the Crown Prince? Because it's a different situation. As you said, it's very complicated.
It's complicated, and it's complicated because there are different views. I'm sure that the leaders of Saudi Arabia understand exactly that the threat in the Middle East today is Iran. And therefore, cooperation or talking with Israel only can give a solution, or a kind of solution, to this problem. And the fact that for the first time, publicly, the Prime Minister, or half publicly, secretly publicly, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, visited Saudi Arabia, it says a lot. It's true, there are some other voices in the Arab world, as you mentioned, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, which think differently. It's okay. But at the end, you know, leaders are the one who show the road, who show the path for the future. I want to remind you that when Israel signed a peace agreement with Egypt in the 70s, Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, had to confront also other voices within Egypt. But at the end, and by the way, also Menachem Begin, the Israeli Prime Minister, had to confront his own opposition at home. At the end, leaders are there in order to pave the path for the future. And luckily, this is what we saw at the meeting between the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
But will Mohammed bin Salman be so strong because his power, let's say it like this, is based on the good relations with some Western countries, especially United States of America, especially Donald Trump, who will no longer lead America. Will this situation be the same in the Biden administration, we think? I'm not talking about Israel and the United States. I'm talking about the United States' view upon the peace process and, of course, the relationship with the Saudis.
I have no doubts. I have no doubts that the good relations which we saw and we are seeing these days will continue also under the Biden administration because of the main reason that the United Arab Emirates, the Saudis, Bahrain and other countries are doing it not only as a gesture in front of the Trump administration. They are doing it because they really believe in it. And you know, in our region, when Israel signs a peace accord with a country in the past, the peace is a cold peace, let's put it this way. There is cooperation, but it's mostly discreet. In this case, in the last accords with Bahrain and with the United Arab Emirates, we see how eager each side is to go further and to sign more accords and to sign more agreements and to find more ways of cooperation in order to deepen and strengthen these agreements. And this is what is important, and it shows how important it is also for the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain to sign these agreements, not only for Israel.
You're talking only about leadership level, or also you're referring to the people's level?
I'm referring also to the people level. Let's take, for example, the business community. Almost every week there are few delegations from both countries visiting the other countries.
Both countries meaning?
Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Bahrain. Ministers from Bahrain visiting Israel, and so on and so forth. It's a different type of an agreement than the agreements we are used to in the Middle East, and I hope that it's only the beginning. Not only that I hope, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, soon we will see more countries in the Middle East, in the Gulf area, coming in this direction. It's a new paradigm. It's a new Middle East.
And what if the Biden administration decides to change this paradigm and to, I don't know, to start and dismantle the peace agreement that the Trump administration created?
I don't think it will happen because, you know, with the American administration, when a new administration comes, in most cases, the legacy, especially when it comes to the Middle East, the legacy remains, which means if the American administration decided something for the Middle East or regarding the peace agreement or the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, the new administration don't change it so fast. First. Second, I think that the new American administration in general, and especially President-elect Biden, they know the Middle East very well. Very, very well. I had the pleasure to attend 2 meetings of our president with back then Vice President Biden, and knowing how strong his feelings are towards Israel, and knowing how knowing the friendship which President-elect Biden has towards Israel, I don't see a big change in the American policy in the Middle East. Maybe it will help the Palestinians, you know, to come back to the table of negotiations, hopefully. But when it comes to the United States, I still believe that the bipartisan support that Israel gets in the United States is the key element for Israel's security and prosperity.
And how will the withdrawal of the troops from the Middle East be seen in Israel, if it's going to be put in place after all?
First, let's see what will be decided.
Yes.
Of course, Israel prefers to see an American presence in the Middle East. I think it's good to the free world. I think it's good for the moderate Arab countries. I think it's good also for Europe. But at the end, it's an American decision.
Of course. I was talking about a possible scenario. Do you have a backup plan for that as a country?
As you know, Israel trusts Israel. And when it comes to our security...
So the answer is yes.
When it comes to Israel's security, I can assure you that the Israeli government and the Israeli security services, we based our security on our own abilities.
Okay, and Biden administration already declared that wants to bring back America in a, let's say, better position with Iran, and I'm talking about the nuclear deal, of course. If this will happen, how will this affect Israel?
Everyone understands today that 2020 is not 2015. Things have changed. The international community understands that Iran is bluffing. I mean, we saw it. Israel brought the archive from Iran, and we saw the documents in which the Iranians are bluffing the international community. First. Second, everyone understands today that the JCPOA, the agreement which was signed with Iran, has to be changed. And there are other elements that must be included in this agreement when it comes to long-range missiles, when it comes to Iran's involvement in terror, and so on and so forth. And you know, no American administration is naive. The American administration knows exactly what are the facts on the ground. President-elect Biden knows very well the Iran dossier. He was dealing with it at the Obama's administration. So the moment the West, or the moment the free world will negotiate again, if the free world negotiates again with the Iranians, everyone understands that we are talking here about a different scenario.
Well, since you mentioned the archive of Tehran brought by Mossad in Israel and presented by your Prime Minister to the public eye, there is also neither a confirmation nor a denial that Mossad also killed the head of the nuclear program of Iran. Something like that would happen only with the agreement of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister. The question is, if Mossad did a lot of problems like this when it comes to terror, is it a terror act to be good at physics?
Let's put it this way. Iran is trying to achieve nuclear capacity. And it's not another democracy or a Western country which is trying to reach a nuclear capacity. It's a tyranny. It's a tyranny, it's a dictatorship, and therefore I think that the efforts of the international community to stop Iran from having a nuclear capacity is a prior and it's an important goal that the Western world should achieve.
That's it, no matter what. Okay. Vorbim în română pentru că facem acest interviu cu ocazia faptului că sunteți deja de 2 ani ambasador în România și s-au întâmplat foarte multe lucruri între România și Israel în mandatul dumneavoastră de ambasador. În primul rând, dacă ne întoarcem la 2020, când lumea a fost blocată, da, am fost în carantină mai mult sau mai puțin, sau am fost limitați să călătorim, au fost foarte multe vizite oficiale, chiar și în timpul lockdown-ului, dinspre România înspre Israel. Ce decizii s-au luat după acele vizite?
Eu cred că orice ocazia care avem pentru un șef de stat a vizita într-o altă țară, care este o țară prietenoasă, trebuie să le facem. Și din acest motiv am avut în acest an 3 vizite. Prima vizită a fost al președintele Iohannis în ianuarie, înainte de pandemie. După aia am avut pe ministrul de externe, Bogdan Aurescu, în Israel la începutul septembrie și am avut pe primul ministru Orban în Israel la începutul noiembrie. În orice vizită, unul dintre componentele importante când au discutat israelieni și partea romană era acest component economic, fiindcă noi toți știm că atmosfera politică sau relația politică între Israel și România este în vârf, este foarte bună. Dar trebuie să punem și conținut. Și conținutul economic e un conținut important. Și din acest motiv și ministrul de externe al Israelului, Gabi Ashkenazi, cu omologul său și primul ministru Benjamin Netanyahu cu omologul său au discutat cum putem să dezvoltăm relația economică și relații economice între Israel și România.
Domnule ambasador, mulțumesc mult pentru acest interviu. Toda raba.
Toda raba, a fost o plăcere.